I think it's important to also recognize that the pandemic can be positive for certain people's mental health.
Coronavirus, you know about this whole thing? Horrible.
Social distancing, and that's an aggressive measure that's taken to help contain an outbreak.
Americans should be prepared for more than 100,000 deaths before we get
I am
through this.
officially declaring a national emergency.
Yeah, my mother is not expendable.
COVID-19, who tested positive, social distancing, for vaccination,
face mask,
and human life.
Coronavirus.
And several colleges making some last-minute decisions to go remote at the tail end of the semester after seeing an acceleration of COVID cases among students.
Urging students to leave campus at their earliest convenience. More than 20 colleges have issued booster shot requirements in recent weeks.
40% of college students in one specific survey said that they don't even have enough money to last until the semester.
Studies across the world show that it's young people especially who are experiencing increased levels of anxiety and depression during the pandemic.
No, mental health is not going good.
I mean, all you saw was four walls and your parents and the toilet. Like, that's it. Like, that's so depressing.
And I was drinking a lot of coffee. The YouTube algorithm kept sending me videos about how there was no water in California and everywhere was on fire. And I was just like, the world's ending.
The social aspects of what was going on really affected me. I've gone through 3 depression phases since the pandemic started.
Well, for me, it was hard because I was used to literally I was out every weekend.
It's true that students have suffered greatly during the coronavirus pandemic, and that's precisely what the common discourse on this topic highlights. But there's much more to their experiences than the negative aspects most interviewers focus on. Hi, I'm Ari, an anthropology student here at UCLA, and I interviewed 4 young adult community college students on their COVID-19 experiences. I found a lot of information that I was expecting to find. Things like adverse mental health effects, poor financial health, hits to their social lives. You get the point. But because of a particular anthropological method I used, I uncovered a whole range of experiences among my interviewees that I wouldn't have otherwise. Using an open-ended interview style means that I refrain from asking interviewees direct questions like, how did the pandemic negatively affect your family life? Instead, I asked more broad questions like, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of the COVID-19 pandemic as it pertains to your life? This left room for the interviewee to determine how they responded based on their most prevalent experiences. And they responded positively more often than not. Take Blake, for example. When I asked him the golden question, here's how he responded.
Mainly it gave me a lot more time with my friends, we got a lot closer because before COVID, I was always pushing them to do things and we didn't really get to talk as much. I feel like we were very focused on whatever activity we were doing. But then when the lockdown happened and there was no external stimulus to keep us entertained, we just talked to each other a lot. And so we got a lot closer. So, and that's honestly been the biggest takeaway.
Later in our conversation, Blake expressed his concerns surrounding the health and safety of his immunocompromised parents, his feelings of hopelessness about the state of the planet, and other negatively affected aspects of life. So I wondered why the first thing that came to mind, the main part of his experience, his biggest takeaway from quarantine, was his improved relationship with his friends. I rewatched the interview to look for other positive effects in his life, and I found that during the pandemic, Blake spent time investigating his cultural heritage and making connections that were previously missing from his life.
It wasn't until really COVID that I started being the world is a lot more messed up than I thought it was. And it started because I had a lot of time to myself and I was researching a lot of my own culture because on my mom's side, she's half indigenous Mexican and half European Spanish, and she never talks about the other side of the family. And so I wanted to learn about that because it just felt like something that was missing from my life. They're saying that human bodies, your flesh is made from the crops that grow here, and if you should live your life really in service to this planet because you're made from that. So that was really what got me more like involved and interested in why, like, I don't know, it made so like an immense tie to the planet. Like,
Blake's narrative shows that understanding student experiences through the pandemic is not as simple as taking survey responses based on how it's assumed this demographic was affected. There's something more here, something I couldn't have known from his survey response alone, something I was only able to learn through the power of narrative and open-ended questions. To better understand, let's take a look at Sophie, who responded to the golden question similarly to Blake. To describe her quarantine experience, she used words with positive connotations like decent, opportunity, and recharge. 19-year-old Sophie is an only child to 2 parents and a full-time student at College of the Canyons in Santa Clarita. Her survey indicated that her mental health was negatively affected by the pandemic. So when we sat down to talk, I asked her to expand on her response that this pandemic, in reality, has exhausted all aspects of her life. Sophie explained that while this was true and isolation made her feel like a caged animal, her mental health was positively affected as well because quarantine gave her free time to explore her interests.
I mean, before quarantine, I would say I was average, in quarantine to now. I feel like it's better because quarantine was so freaking long. It like really gave me time to kind of like expand on, things that like I wanted to learn about, things I've wanted to do. I mean, because quarantine's like nothing but free time. So I feel like that gave me an outlet to like kind of finally catch up on my own personal things that I wanted to do, which I think in retrospect helped my mental health because, it's like, do that for yourself. You've always wanted to do that. Why not do it now? I mean, you have nothing else better to do. You're locked up in your house.
But the data from Sophie's interview also gave me more examples of positive effects of the pandemic. And after speaking with all 4 participants, the positive effects had become an overwhelming trend. And I started to seriously question how this pandemic, which inherently implies negativity and suffering, could have positive effects as well. The main thing I've displayed here is how Sophie and Blake's newfound free time allowed them to explore their interests. So what can we learn from these findings? Well, this pandemic is a disaster, and disasters disrupt our routines, but routine disruptions are not always bad. This disaster gave students time to do things they otherwise couldn't, which infers that pre-pandemic, students generally lacked the free time they needed to explore their interests during these formative years of their lives. So what else did I find along these lines? David, a 25-year-old student, expressed that their education has been more rich as a direct result of the pandemic.
Even though the number says 60 people, I know I'm not looking at 60 people. If I was in person, I know I would be terrified to speak. Right. But online, I'm like, I'm not afraid to share my opinion and like speak with people. And so I feel like I've made so many internet friends throughout the pandemic, and just my education has been more rich. In that like immersive spaces feel more real to me, even though sometimes it's just online. And a lot of POCs, especially me I identify as queer. I think that also has helped being online to feel safe to speak my opinion a lot.
David explains another positive experience directly related to quarantine. It's great that David experienced a more rich education since being online, and they partially attribute this to being online since a very early age and thriving in that setting. But their newly rich education shines light on a big issue: the fact that the physical classroom is an unsafe place for them to voice their opinions as a queer person of color. Question what we can do to make students' shared physical spaces safe so their voices can be heard. So if you interact with students at all, please hear this. Student experience is intricate, and we can't know these intricacies, and more importantly, can't support them through these intricacies unless we take a moment to sit down and listen to them. But the findings of my project applies to non-student lives as well. Ultimately, when life turns upside down, things that were previously upside down turn right side up. We have the agency to pick and choose what changes that were brought about by the pandemic we want to make permanent moving forward. What will your post-pandemic reality look like? And how is that reality equipped to support the nuance of experiences of the students in your life, whether you're a professor, a physician, a parent, or a peer?